This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host. Helping take our leadership to the next level, I have with me here today Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Good to be with you, Sam, as always.
Yes, and we've been, one of the ways I think that all of our leadership can benefit is going deep in the words of Jesus.
Yeah.
And perhaps the greatest leader to ever walk the face of the planet. And we've been in this series on the Beatitudes, and I think what we originally thought was maybe a two-parter is now into, I think this is our fourth.
Well, it's inflation.
Yeah.
Inflation is affecting everything these days.
It is.
Yep.
Even your exposition. So this will be the final episode on the Beatitudes. And so what Beatitudes are left?
Well, we're getting to verse 9, where it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." And, you know, I would just say those who claim to be Christians are Christians because they're followers of Jesus. And it amazes me, and I mean, I want to be careful because I don't want to sound just judgmental of others, because this can include me too. But we say that Jesus is our model. We say that we're following him. And yet, so many times we make a conscious choice not to be like Jesus. Jesus will act a certain way, and it's almost as if we just turn a blind eye to that and say, well, I know that he forgave his enemies and loved his enemies, but I'm certainly not going to do that. I'm not going to be nice to that kind of person.
Well, there's always a justification, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like we just have this automatic escape clause that says, I mean, because if the truth is, if you take a really close look at Jesus, he's pretty radical. I mean, he does a lot of things that just go completely against what comes natural to us. And we sort of know that at one level, but whenever we come up against it, we just automatically downsize and go to a default to say, you know, well, I know that that's what he says, but I can't do that, or that's impossible. And we need to just really take seriously as Christians that our calling is not only to try to be like Jesus, but if you're a Christian, you actually have Jesus by his Holy Spirit dwelling within you. And he wants to live out his life through you the same way he lived out his life when he walked on the earth. So it's not even that you have to try and do that. You just have to surrender to the Spirit of God who will do that through you. So it is impossible for you to love your enemies, but it's not impossible for Jesus to. And so you've got to let him do that in you. And so I think the Beatitudes are just a great case in point to say, yeah, they sound poetic, they sound nice, but if you actually dig down in and say, well, so how does this actually look in my daily living, then we quickly start making excuses. And I would just challenge our listeners today, don't be too quick to excuse away the hard sayings of Jesus. He says some really hard things. Years ago, there was a book by New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce called The Hard Sayings of Jesus. And it's a whole book on just things Jesus said that are difficult. And not a bad book just to kind of look over and realize, wow, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that without God's help I could never do. And
I think especially as we look at peacemakers, you know, I wonder how many of us, especially on social media, are quite the opposite of peacemakers, because we feel we have a just cause to rage war against our political opponents or people who disagree with us.
Yeah, I think, and especially we are in such a polarized culture and society today, and I think certainly politically, I just know that there are people who profess to be Christians who literally would not be nice to a Democrat. I mean, if they're Republican, it's like, I just cannot be civil to someone who would vote Democrat. If someone would vote for Biden, then I can't even be nice to them. And I would say, well, but Jesus said that you're supposed to. And So don't tell that to Jesus, that you can't be civil to someone who voted differently than you did, or has a different view on Roe versus Wade than you do. And we live in a culture now where there are movements, certainly within our denomination and in a lot of Christian denominations today, where there is a segment that is battling for orthodoxy and truth, and I'm a big fan of truth and orthodoxy. I think it's great to have proper beliefs, and I'll challenge something that's false, but there's a way to do that where you don't at the same time demonize the person who holds a different view than you, and you don't have to take delight in slamming people that disagree with you.
Yeah.
And I've literally known Christians who took delight in the fact that perhaps someone that had a different opinion than them got fired from their church, or they even fell into immorality, and it was almost as if, well, good, that's great. Another one bit the dust here that disagrees with us, and I think it's difficult for a lot of folks because you don't want to ever feel like you're condoning something that's wrong. We almost feel like if we make peace with someone we disagree with, somehow we're condoning their heresy, and I think peacemakers are not necessarily people that just give away the farm and just say, okay, well, I'll just give up all of my biblical beliefs so that I can get along with you. That's not what a peacemaker does. But I think like all these Beatitudes, it starts with the heart, and it means that you truly desire to be at peace with your brother, your sister, and you measure your words, and you say, there's certain ways you can talk to someone you disagree with where you can respectfully disagree and you can still respect that the person has their own opinion. And then there's ways to disagree where you antagonize them, where you try to humiliate them or mock them. And of course that you're not even discussing truth now, you're attacking. And you'll never make peace by attacking someone else. I think we feel like, well, yeah, if I completely wipe them out, there won't be any conflict anymore because there'll
be no one to disagree.
They'll be obliterated. So I'll just obliterate my enemies and then there'll be peace. And that's not what it means. It means, can you respectfully disagree with someone? You don't have to compromise your beliefs, but can you do it? Can you hold your beliefs graciously? Can you show respect to people as individuals, even if you disagree with their opinion? But for us, I think we become so polarized that it's almost like you can't even respect someone. I mean, anyone who's stupid enough to think that way, how could I even be civil to someone like that?
Yeah, well, and respect for someone that has a different opinion is now kind of seen as like a tacit approval of that different opinion.
And which is not necessary. It just means that you value people and you value relationships, and so you can still be kind to someone you disagree with. And of course, like all these, it has a reward, and it says, for they will be called the sons of God. And of course, if you're a female listening to this, it's like, well, I don't want to be anyone's son. But but of course, in this culture, in Jesus' day, only sons could inherit from the deceased father. So in the will, women in this culture had to be cared for by a man generally, and so you couldn't inherit money, you couldn't necessarily run a business. So the sons were the ones who got the inheritance. And so basically what it's saying here is not that you'd be a man if you're a woman, but what it's saying is that you'll be an heir just like everybody else. Yeah. So you'll get just as much of an inheritance whether you're a male or a female. And so it's actually saying you're going to get the full reward. And so it's interesting to me when it gets talking about inheritances, basically, something that is a very positive thing. Jesus says, yeah, for that, you have to be a peacemaker. And that it doesn't just mean that you're peaceable. It doesn't mean that you're just a nice person. It actually means a peacemaker is someone who makes peace. It's someone that goes into a situation, a relationship that is hostile and it's maybe divided, and they find a way to actually make peace. It's not enough just to say, well, I try to just, not be offensive. It's, yeah, but what have you done to actually make peace with someone that you don't have peace with? Or have you crossed the aisle and actually tried to get to know people that are different than you? And when was the last time you went for coffee with someone that voted differently than you in the last election? Or just has some very different social opinions than you? It can actually be very educational. And you can discover that you actually have a lot of things in common, a lot of things that you both do agree on. And they perhaps need just to know that people that hold your opinions can actually be quite Christ-like. So the first beatitude here is just saying, blessed are you when you make peace, for you will be called the sons of God. By the way, to being a son of God, certainly is talking about inheritance and being a legitimate child and so on, and all the benefits and privileges that come with that. But I think it also, just one other thing I might say, is that it also can reflect a family resemblance. When someone looks at you and says, Sam, you look just like your dad, typically, unless you have a really ugly dad, which you don't.
No, that's definitely a good thing.
You could say, yeah, well, thanks. And I think in one sense it's saying that when you are making peace, people look at you and say, that reminds me a lot of your Heavenly Father. That reminds me of what God is like. He's, in fact, in 2 Corinthians, it talks about being given the ministry of reconciliation. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of religious folks today that do not take that seriously.
Yeah, have no interest in.
They honestly believe that they can just wage holy war for the cause of truth against anybody they disagree with, and it's such an ugly spirit, it's such an ugly heart that you just say this. You could not be called a son of God because you have no interest whatsoever in making peace with anybody.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break here, and we'll wrap up when we come back.
Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby. I'm the co-author of Experiencing God. And here at the Blackaby Bible Institute, we're offering an online class of Experiencing God that people can take from around the world. No one had any idea back in 1990, when Experiencing God was first published, that it would be so life-transforming and that people would experience revival. They'd be set free from burdens they'd carried for years. I can't go anywhere in the world without people telling me how this material has changed their life. And so we offer it as the Blackabys, where we have all kinds of video resources, a live stream where you can submit live questions and get answers from myself and others, and just many different resources that will enhance your experience of Experiencing God. So I want to encourage you, if you've never taken the class before, or even if you have, the Blackaby Bible Institute will offer you more resources than you could have gotten anywhere else. And so we look forward to studying with you, and we're praying that it will change your life as you do.
So, Richard, we finally come to the last of the Beatitudes. At last.
Blessed are they who can make it to the end.
Yes. If you've stuck with us through this series, we appreciate you, and we hope this has been just an eye-opening series for you. If nothing else, a series of encouragement that when we really look at the words of Christ and how he instructed us to live as Christians, but also as leaders, that these can just be a time of encouragement for you to take your leadership to the next level. And sometimes that means really looking at things from an entirely different perspective. And Jesus had a way of sort of turning the traditional or the orthodoxy on its head and giving us new ways to look at things and to do things and certainly to lead. And so with that, Richard, why don't you walk us through the last of the Beatitudes?
Yeah, verse 10 and 11, it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted." It's not a surprise he left this one to the end.
Yeah.
Because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And then verse 11, it says, "You are blessed when they insult you and persecute you falsely, and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me, because your reward is great in heaven. You almost feel like, as people are listening to Jesus say this for the first time, they're kind of shocked at what he's saying, but it's getting worse and worse, and it's almost
okay,
like,
I can
when
be
is this guy
poor?
going to stop here? Like, if this gets any more radical, like I'm not following this guy. Like, it's going to be too hard.
Yeah, I feel like all the ones before, like, okay, that's different, or that's hard, but okay, certainly doable. And then you get down to the end, and it's just sort of like pump the brakes a second. Like, what's going on?
This blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Of course, to be persecuted, nobody desires that except a masochist. But notice that qualifier. It says because of righteousness, and because I've known some people. I mean, literally, I've known folks that took pride in the fact that they made everybody angry. That there were they were always doing battle. There literally are just people who love a good fight, and there's a lot of them in Christian circles who they love conflict. They love being upset at people, and they take pride in how many people are upset with them. But oftentimes they're being persecuted, if you will, because they're jerks, not because of Christ, not because of righteousness. It's because they were rude to someone else. They lied about someone else. They misrepresented someone else's opinion. And when people naturally push back, they take delight because now they're being persecuted. And I would say that's not what Jesus is talking about. Just being a combative person who's looking for a fight. If everywhere you go, and I've just known people like that. I've literally known people that it just inevitably, they just rub people the wrong way. And before they knew it, they're getting into arguments at parties and at family gatherings, and they're getting people upset with them around the dinner table, and they sort of take pride in the fact that they just tell it like they see it. They just, if you want, you don't have to guess what I think. And I would just say Jesus is just condemning that and just saying, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, Jesus says, when you do something that truly is righteous, and righteous means it's right. It's the right thing to do. It means that it is holy actions. It means you're acting like Jesus would act. And when you do a good thing, and then people still persecute you for that, then and it's not talking about you looking for a fight. It's not you kind of walking into a room full of unbelievers and saying, I'm a Christian and I'm going to do the Christ-like thing. Who wants to make something out of it? That's not it. It's in humility. He's already talked about being poor in spirit and about being humble. And when you have all those previous qualities and you're behaving the way Jesus does, and you still face persecution, then he says you're blessed, because by trying with all your heart to be like Jesus, and trying to be light, it offended the darkness. Well, then it says your reward will be great. And I feel like that we probably haven't really even mentioned it enough, but I've been places like Nigeria a couple of times, and wonderful, wonderful Christian people there. But of course, the northern part, especially of Nigeria, is being taken over by radical Muslim groups, and regularly in the news, we'll be told of Fulani herdsmen, Islamic extremists that will come into a village and kidnap hundreds of schoolgirls, or they'll kill a bunch of Christians in a village, terrorize them, basically just trying to terrorize and intimidate Christians to leave the northern part of Nigeria so that it's just entirely Muslim. And it's just horrifying when you hear of these villages and a bunch of thug terrorists come in with semiotic rifles and just start slaughtering defenseless villagers for no other reason than that they're Christians. I'll tell you, just every time I see another news release of that, I feel like I need to just stop what I'm doing. And oftentimes I'm sitting there in front of my laptop just seeing a news release, and I'm sitting in the comfort of a hotel room or my office and realizing that over in Africa there, hundreds of people have been killed, or people's daughters have been kidnapped and taken away. They may be raped. They may be given in child marriage to a grown man, and all because they're Christians, and so they don't deserve to be treated with any kind of human kindness or dignity. And I feel like as Christians, we need to just stop, especially in the West, and just somehow, just in solidarity with them, if nothing else, just pray about them, just read their news, and just if there is any way to aid or to help with that, to do so. But there are people, certainly in Afghanistan, living in terror. I've been in places like China and other places where there's certainly intimidation and pressure upon you if you're a Christian. I've ministered in Cuba and other places where it's very, very different kind of world. I've spoken in various Muslim countries. I remember one Muslim country where some Christians were gathering, and it wasn't necessarily illegal to be a Christian church, but the Christians just met in a church building, and there were some Muslim folks who gathered outside the building. They just knew that there were Christians in their meeting, and they began to protest that there were Christians even meeting in the building. And they finally set fire to cars parked outside in the streets and rioted and caused all kinds of damage. The Christians never came out. They never spoke. They never propagated. They were just having a private meeting in a building. But the government basically passed a law after that saying, well, Christians can't really meet like that because it just causes trouble. And it's like, well, they weren't causing the trouble.
Yeah.
But they were the ones who were penalized because others were rioting in the streets. And when you see stories like that, you just realize, you know what, there are people who legitimately are in humility and Christ-likeness, seeking to honor Christ, and yet they're being persecuted for it. And that's what Jesus is talking about. And, I think certainly even in America and in the West, we're finding more and more that there is persecution, there is pressure. It's going to be more and more difficult to follow Christian principles, even in America. And, one example I think just to watch for is that there's the whole LBGQT and so on. There's a movement right now even to say that, for instance, if you're a Christian college, certainly in a state like California, and you say, well, okay, we're not going to put transgender people in a male dormitory. You can't share a room if you're or maybe if you're a biological male but you claim to be female, we can't put you in share a girl's dorm with her, or go into the girls' showers or whatever else. And there are pressures to say, well, you as a Christian college, you can't discriminate against people that way, and if you do, then you won't be allowed to give student loans to people, all the government assistance to international students or whatever else, or tax breaks. You won't qualify for any of that. And so I know there's a lot of Christians right now saying, well, just trying to just uphold Christian principles and run a Christian school. Or if you say, there is pressure that is only going to increase, of where you even say maybe a church, you want to hire someone on staff, and if you appear to be discriminating because you're not hiring someone who's openly homosexual or transgender, whatever else, then you can face lawsuits and all kinds of pressures. And so that's on the horizon, and there have been laws that have already been toyed with and presented, that I think, I don't want to be alarmist, but to say it's very real. Certainly I led for years in Canada, and they're farther down that road than the United States is, and there were all kinds of things you had to do to protect yourself, so that if, for instance, you were a Christian organization, that you could justify hiring people that were Christians or that had the same moral values and followed the same moral systems that you did. But there will be more and more conflict in that regard for trying to uphold righteousness. And so those days are inching closer each day, each week. And so I think we should be prepared even now. I think Christians have for too long perhaps been comfortably in the majority in America, and it was much more easy to uphold and promulgate Christian beliefs, but that's changing, and I think perhaps we need to go back and revisit the Beatitudes to say, you know what, don't be so terrified of being persecuted for righteousness. You know, we kind of live in fear about society becoming more and more secular, but Jesus actually said, "Blessed are you if you are persecuted, if you do suffer for my cause." And you know, last thing I might just say is, I think we've got a churches filled with people that sometimes it's questionable whether they truly know what it means to be born again, to be a true follower of Jesus. It's more of a cultural thing. But I think with a little bit of persecution comes upon the American church. We don't like persecution, but I think in some ways it will separate the sheep from the goats, the half-hearted to the wholehearted.
I wouldn't even call it persecution, but I think even sort of the turmoil of COVID has even revealed, you know, that some church members were not necessarily believers, and we saw some, you know, thinning of churches, even through something as not persecution as COVID. And so I think, I mean,
that could just be an inconvenience, and it just took an inconvenience to cause people to quit following and attending. And so I who knows what purging might take place and pruning might take place with a little persecution in the American church. But anyway, these are the Beatitudes, and of course each one Jesus always comes back with a reward. And, you know, there are rewards in the Bible. I don't know if that should be what drives and motivates you, but Jesus does say, not that you'll never face some negative things, but the reward, the blessing, all of that's going to will far exceed whatever negative might come. And even if you are in northern Nigeria and you're being herded up and shot, as horrific as that is, I think heaven is even better still. And I think it might be kind of embarrassing one day to be gathered in heaven and to have a lot of us kind of soft American Christians standing there to worship, and around us are a bunch of martyrs who paid a far greater price than we ever did to be a follower of Jesus. And sometimes it's hard not to be a little embarrassed to say, God, I'm grateful that I'm in a country like the United States, but boy, I tell you, it's hard not to go soft as a Christian sometimes when everything is so easy. And so maybe it's not quite so bad to face a bit of hardship as well. Certainly there are rewards that come with that. And so with that, we've covered the Beatitudes. We'll do some other studies like this, I think, in the future, Sam, just to kind of camp ourselves for a little bit in some of these great teachings of Jesus. And again, don't be too quick just to skim past these and water them down and sort of translate them into something that doesn't push you very much. Let the harshness, the radicalness of Jesus' teaching sit there before your life and affect you the way I think Jesus intended for it to when he spoke those words.
Absolutely. And we'll certainly leave links to the book you mentioned, The Hard Sayings of Jesus, and links for that will be in the show notes. And with that, we'll leave it there. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.